The night I found out my daughter-in-law had made a copy of my key, I did not call the police. I did not confront her. I did not even raise my voice. I sat at my kitchen table, looked toward the locked door at the end of the hallway, and I thought about Carol. My wife had been gone for 12 years by then. But that evening, sitting in the quiet of a house she had loved and protected, I felt her as clearly as if she were standing 2 feet away with her arms crossed and that particular look on her face, the one that said she had already known this was coming. And she had already done something about it. Serena had been in this family for 2 years. In those 2 years, she had never asked me what Carol was like. She had looked at Carol's photograph on the living room wall exactly once, said she had a lovely face, and moved her attention back to the hardwood floors, the crown molding, and the antique clock Carol's father had left us. Most people who marry into a family want to know the people inside it. Serena wanted to know the square footage. But she had made one mistake in all that calculating. She had assumed the door was the only thing standing between her and everything my wife had built. She did not know about the trust. She did not know about the letter. And she had no idea that Carol had planned for someone exactly like her, nearly 15 years before Serena ever walked through my front door. Let me go back to the beginning. For 12 years, no one entered my study. Not my son Caleb. Not my neighbors. Not even the woman who cleaned my house every 2 weeks and knew where I kept the spare light bulbs and the good wine. The door stayed locked behind a deadbolt. And the combination was a date I could not forget, even if I tried. April 9th. 1961. Carol's birthday. People who noticed the door probably imagined an old widower hiding grief in a locked room. Dusty photo albums. Unpaid bills. The kind of loneliness a man keeps behind a deadbolt because he cannot figure out how to carry it anywhere else. They were only partly right. Behind that door were 30 years of careful planning. Property records. Financial documents. Trust agreements. Carol's handwritten instructions. And a sealed envelope with our son's name written across it in blue ink that had faded slightly over the years, but never lost its intention. I did not lock that room because I was afraid of the world. I locked it because Carol had taught me the difference between love and access. She had grown up watching what happened when a kind heart was left unguarded. Her grandmother had lost nearly everything to a man who came in smiling, who made himself useful, who called his reaching affection. By the time anyone understood what he was doing, the accounts were empty and the house had a new name on the deed. Carol never forgot that. So years before her diagnosis, when we were still young enough to believe we had all the time we needed, she sat me down one evening after Caleb had gone to bed and said something I have never stopped hearing. Martin, love is not the same as access. And one day, someone is going to stand in this house and confuse the two. When that happens, I want to make sure we already closed the door. At the time, I thought she was talking about the past. I did not understand she was describing the future. Caleb called me on a Thursday afternoon in early October. I remember the exact moment because I had just come home from physical therapy and was pouring myself a cup of coffee I had been thinking about for the last 40 minutes of the drive. My knee was still aching. The kitchen was quiet. The afternoon light was coming through the window at that low autumn angle that makes even ordinary rooms look almost beautiful. Then my phone rang. 1 second of Caleb's breathing was enough. My son had never been able to hide fear. Even as a boy, before he said a single word, his silence told me everything. He would go very still, very careful, the way a person does when they know that saying something out loud will make it harder to take back. Dad. His voice was barely above a whisper. Something happened. I set the coffee down. What is it? Pause. Too long. Serena was at the house today. While you were at your appointment, I asked her to water the plants. He stopped. And another pause. She found the spare key on the hook by the back door. I think she made a copy. I think she went into the study. I did not speak for a moment. Not because I was surprised, because I wasn't. I stared down the hallway toward that locked door. Thought of Serena's eyes the first time she stepped into this house. The way they had moved slowly over everything. Measuring. The way she had said the word bones when most people would have said beautiful. What exactly did she tell you? I asked. Caleb exhaled. She's been asking about your accounts more lately. And about the house. What happens to it when the time comes? She said she was just being practical. Practical. The word people use when greed wants to sound responsible. I closed my eyes for a moment. Listen to me. I said, do not confront her yet. Do not let her know you called me. Can you do that? Dad. What's going on? I looked toward the locked door. Something your mother prepared for a long time ago. I said, and something I should have explained to you much sooner. I met Serena 14 months before she became my daughter-in-law. Caleb arrived early that first Sunday dinner, which told me everything before she even walked through the door. He spent 40 minutes talking about her, smiling at the wrong moments, using her name slightly too often. My son had always worn his heart in a place anyone standing close enough could read it. Then Serena arrived, 40 minutes late, smiling as though lateness were a personality trait rather than a choice. Her apology was smooth, effortless, practiced the kind that sounds spontaneous because it has been used before. She shook my hand firmly, looked me straight in the eye, and then stepped into the living room. And her attention went to the house, not to Caleb, who was watching her with open adoration. To the room itself, her eyes moved slowly, deliberately, over the hardwood floors, the built-in shelves, the crown molding, the framed photographs on the mantel, the antique clock Carol's father had left us when he passed. The way she looked at each thing was not the way a guest looks at a home they find charming. It was the way a buyer looks at a property they are still deciding about. This place has such character, she said, running her fingers lightly along the back of one of the dining chairs. Older homes have good bones. Not beautiful, not warm, not cozy. Bonus. Something in me went very still. At dinner, she asked about my career, my retirement, my hobbies. Caleb heard warmth and curiosity. I heard a checklist wrapped in good manners. She asked whether I found retirement an adjustment, whether I kept my investments active or moved everything into safer accounts, whether I found the house too large now that I was managing it alone. Not one question about Carol. Not one question about what kind of man her boyfriend had been raised to be, or where that man came from. Only questions about what existed now, what it was worth, and how close she might be able to get to it. I gave her careful, vague answers. She smiled and nodded. Caleb looked proud. And when dinner was over and they had left, I stood alone in my kitchen for a long time. Carol's photograph sat on the small table under the hallway lamp. She was smiling in that picture, but not softly. Carol had never been soft in the way people mean when they want to dismiss a woman. She was kind, deeply kind, but her kindness had a spine running through it. Looking at her face that evening, I heard her voice again. Some people don't enter a family. They inspect it. 6 months later, Caleb came to my house on a Thursday with a velvet box in his pocket and the kind of hope on his face that a father either wants to protect or is afraid to break. He pretended to stop by casually. He asked about my knee, made a joke about the old coffee maker Carol had bought in 2009 that I still refused to replace. But Caleb had never been a convincing actor, not even in his 30s. Finally, he sat at the kitchen table and placed the velvet box between us. Inside was Carol's mother's ring. He had asked for it months earlier, and I had given it to him because it belonged to our family's future, because someday it was supposed to continue forward, because I wanted to believe the woman receiving it would understand the weight of what she was being handed. Looking at it now, every warning inside me stood up at once. I wanted to say, "Son, listen to me." I wanted to tell him that the woman he loved did not look at him the way she looked at what surrounded him. I wanted to say that love should feel like shelter, not like strategy, and that there was a difference between a person who chose you and a person who chose what they could eventually reach through you. But Caleb was glowing, and I knew that if I said any of that, he would not hear wisdom. He would hear control. He would hear a lonely old man trying to keep his son close. So I hugged him. I told him I was happy for him. And the next morning, before the coffee was finished, I called my attorney. Elaine Porter had handled Carol's estate during those last months when we were all trying to pretend there was still time. She was calm, methodical, and completely unimpressed by emotional pressure, which was exactly why Carol had trusted her above everyone else. When I told her about the engagement, Elaine did not congratulate me. She asked, "Do you have concerns about this woman?" I thought about Serena's eyes moving over my living room. I thought about the questions at dinner. The word bones. The way she had never once asked what Carol was like. "Yes," I said. Enough that I don't want to be wrong and unprepared at the same time. 2 days later, I sat in Elaine's office while she walked me through everything Carol and I had built together. The house was already protected inside the family trust. The investment accounts were properly structured. The life insurance would flow directly into the trust, not into a personal account that could be shared or contested. Serena could be in this family for the next 50 years, and none of that would make her the owner of what Carol had protected. But Elaine still found small gaps. Technical ones. The kind that look harmless until someone desperate and clever hires the right lawyer to squeeze through them. So we closed every one. Then came the prenuptial agreement. I knew that if it came from me directly, Caleb would hear it as an attack on Serena, a vote against his happiness. So Elaine made it procedural. Almost routine. The standard document that families with protected estates and structured trusts sign before marriage. Something entirely ordinary. Serena signed it 4 days before the wedding. Caleb told me afterward that she had cried. I believe the tears were real. I just did not believe they had come from hurt. 3 weeks after the honeymoon, Serena quit her job. Caleb explained it over Sunday dinner with the tone of a man who had agreed to something he was still trying to convince himself about. Her marketing firm had been toxic, he said. She had been undervalued, overworked, emotionally drained. She wanted to build something of her own. Freelance consulting, she said across the table, as though the phrase itself were already a business card. I nodded. I wished her luck. But I watched Caleb's face while she spoke. He was proud of her. Proud to be the kind of husband who could stand beside his wife while she chased something. And that was exactly how Serena had framed it. Not as dependence. Courage. The months passed. And the consulting business remained invisible. No clients materialized. No invoices were mentioned. No income arrived in the joint account. Every delay came with a reasonable explanation. And every explanation came wrapped in just enough vulnerability that questioning it felt cruel. So Caleb did not question it. He paid the rent. He paid the utilities. The groceries. The gym membership, she said, helped her stay focused. He paid the lease on the car she selected herself. Sleek and expensive. Nearly $640 a month in his name, because her credit was not strong enough. She promised it was temporary. 14 months later, nothing had changed. I knew pieces of this because Caleb let things slip without meaning to. A tired joke about savings being tight. A comment about the renovation she had started planning in a kitchen she did not own. A hesitation before he said things were fine that told me things were not fine at all. Each time, I heard what he was not saying. He was not funding a dream. He was financing a waiting game. The subject of my house began appearing in conversation around 18 months into the marriage. Serena never grabbed for it directly. She was too careful for that. She worked in stages. Each request slightly more reasonable sounding than the one before it. Each suggestion arriving through Caleb so that I could never quite accuse her of wanting anything specific. First, it was concern. She just thinks it's a shame. Caleb told me one afternoon that you're alone in such a big place. I looked up from my coffee. A shame. You know, 3 bedrooms, a big yard, Older houses take so much upkeep. A week later, the shape of the idea changed. Serena had been looking at houses near me. Caleb said she thought it would be nice to be close to family. But homes in my neighborhood were expensive. Maybe I might want to contribute to a down payment. Not as pressure, just as a way of investing in their future together. Their future. I told Caleb my assets were not easily liquidated. That should have ended it. Instead, it only taught Serena that asking for money directly was the wrong approach. By the following month, she had a new angle entirely. Maybe they didn't need to buy a separate home at all. Maybe the most practical arrangement, given everything, would be for them to move in with me. She made it sound like family, like warmth, like the natural thing a loving daughter-in-law would propose because she was simply worried about an aging man living alone. But all I heard was access. I said no. Caleb looked hurt, not angry, which was Serena's real gift. She never forced the door herself. She handed my son the key, placed her request inside the language of love, and let him stand there wondering why his father would turn away family. And when every polite route failed, Serena stopped knocking. She went looking for another way in. I arrived at Caleb's apartment the next morning at 9:15. He buzzed me in without a word. The apartment felt like a room where two different arguments had happened simultaneously and neither had been resolved. Caleb was standing in the kitchen in yesterday's shirt, holding a coffee mug with both hands, though I could tell from the look on his face that he had not taken a single sip. Serena was at the dining table. Fresh clothes, hair brushed, makeup done. She looked like a woman who had spent the night not crying, but preparing. "Martin," she said, lifting her chin slightly. I did not respond. I removed my coat, folded it over the back of a chair, and sat across from her without being asked. Caleb stayed near the doorway, somewhere between husband and son, looking like a man who had spent the night losing sleep and was now about to lose certainty too. "You went into my study," I said. "Not a question." Serena's expression tightened for half a second and then smoothed. "I was at your house to water the plants," she said. "Caleb asked me to check in while you were at your appointment. The plants are in the kitchen and by the front window," I said. She blinked. "The study is at the end of the hallway, behind a locked door." The door was already slightly open. She said quickly. "No," I said. "It wasn't." The air in the room changed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but the way it does when a lie suddenly finds that there is nowhere left to stand. Serena glanced at Caleb, then back at me, recalibrating. I wasn't snooping. "Martin," I was concerned. "You live alone. You're getting older. We need to understand what the situation looks like in case something happens to you." We again. I turned to Caleb. "Did you ask your wife to go into my study?" He looked at Serena first. Then he looked at me. "No," he said quietly. "I didn't." And for the first time since I had met her, Serena had nothing ready. She recovered quickly. I had expected that. Her shoulders lowered. Her voice softened. The concerned daughter-in-law returned as smoothly as if the other version had never existed. "Martin, you're making this sound like something it wasn't," she said gently. I said nothing. She turned slightly toward Caleb. "Your father lives alone. He has health appointments. He's at an age where families should understand what arrangements are in place." I wasn't looking for anything. I was trying to help. I let her finish. Then I said, "Serena, people who are worried about family ask the family." Her smile disappeared. "They don't make copies of keys." The room held that sentence for a moment. Her jaw tightened. "You've never trusted me. From the first dinner, every time I try to be part of this family, you shut me out. And now you're making me sound like a criminal for walking down a hallway." "The house is held in a family trust," I said. She stopped. I took a folded document from my coat pocket and placed it flat on the table. "The investment accounts are held in the same trust. The life insurance policy names Caleb as beneficiary, but the proceeds are directed into the trust, not into his personal account. This structure was created by Carol and me 15 years ago. Before her diagnosis, before your marriage, and before you were a name in our lives. Serena stared at the paper. Trusts can be changed, she said. They can, I replied, by the person who controls them. Her eyes narrowed. And that person is not you. She looked at the prenuptial summary at the bottom of the page. She looked at the trust language. She looked at each line the way someone looks at a map when they realize the route they have been counting on does not go where they thought. You planned all of this, she said. No, I answered. Carol planned most of it. I simply honored what she built. Her face changed then. The warmth left. The careful softness left. The daughter-in-law she had been performing since the first Sunday dinner left. What remained was honest. At least, calder, more recognizable. For the first time since I had known her, Caleb saw what I had been watching for 2 years. Not a woman who was hurt. A woman who had just discovered that the vault she had been circling was never going to open. I did not explain everything in that apartment. Some truths are too heavy to lay out in a room where the wrong person is still listening for an angle. So I looked at Caleb and said simply, "Come back to the house with me." Serena turned toward him. Her voice softened one last time. Almost involuntary. "Caleb, you don't have to go anywhere you don't want to." It was a careful thing to say, not a command. And, a suggestion. A soft reminder that choosing to leave with his father would feel like choosing against her. For a moment, he stood completely still. Then he picked up his keys from the counter. "I'll be back later," he said. We drove separately. I watched his car in my rearview mirror the entire way and thought about the boy who used to follow me around the garage on Saturday mornings, asking questions about everything. How engines worked. Why bridges didn't fall. Why wood split along certain lines but not others. Caleb had always wanted to understand things. That was partly why Serena's method had worked for as long as it did. She had not placed ideas in his hands. She had arranged things so that he found them himself, and believed they were his. At the house, I led him to the study. He stood in the hallway looking at the door. Ordinary from the outside. Dark wood, brass knob. One deadbolt. There was nothing to signal that anything important was behind it. I entered Carol's birthday into the keypad. The lock released with a click that sounded louder in the quiet hallway than it probably was. Caleb stepped inside behind me. I had not changed much in 12 years. The room was clean but still. The fireproof cabinet stood against the left wall. 2 bookshelves on the right. Carol's old desk in the center. Cleared except for a lamp and a photograph of the 3 of us from a Christmas that must have been 19 years ago now. Caleb was in his early teens in the picture. Already almost my height. Grinning at something off camera. I opened the cabinet and pulled out the first folder. "Your mother created the trust when you were 21. I said, not because she knew she was dying. She didn't know yet. She did it because she believed love needed walls before danger arrived. Then I reached to the back of the top drawer and removed the envelope. It had been there for 11 years. Carol's handwriting was still clear across the front. Small, deliberate letters. The kind of handwriting that made even a note about milk look like it had been written by someone who chose every word. One word in the center. Caleb. He stared at the envelope before he reached for it. She wrote this. 2 weeks before she died. I said, "She made me promise to give it to you when the time was right." His eyes came up to mine. "And you thought that was today?" I swallowed. I think I waited too long. He did not argue. He opened the envelope slowly, pulling the pages out with the kind of care a person uses when they are afraid that moving too quickly will break something they cannot put back together. I turned to the window while he read. Not because I did not know what the letter said. I had read it once. The day Carol gave it to me. And then I had left it alone. It belonged to our son, not to me. The room was quiet. Then Caleb's breathing changed. Not a collapse. Just that small, sharp intake of breath people take when a sentence finds exactly the wound they have been protecting. He read for several minutes. Carol had written about the trust, about the documents, about why she and I had built walls around what we had worked for. But most of the letter was about him. She told him that his generous heart was not a weakness, that believing in people was nothing to be ashamed of. But she warned him that some people, when they encountered generosity, would see an unlocked door instead of a gift. Then Caleb read the last paragraph aloud. Slowly, his voice slightly rough. I am not asking you to be suspicious of everyone you meet. I am asking you to pay close attention to how people behave when they believe they have nothing to gain. Generosity when someone is watching is performance. Generosity when no one is watching is character. Find the person with the second kind. That is the person worth trusting with everything. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully. He did not fold it the way you fold something you are setting aside. He folded it the way you fold something you are going to keep. We sat in the study for a while longer, without speaking much. Then Caleb said, almost to himself, she never asked about Mom. I looked at him. Serena? He said. She walked past that photograph of Mom in the hallway every Sunday for 2 years. Once, early on, she said she had a lovely face. That was all she ever said. He paused. She never asked what Mom was like. Never asked what I missed. Never asked what kind of person she was. What made her laugh. What she cared about. His voice was quiet, not accusing, figuring something out. She asked about the house, the neighborhood, your retirement, your health. What would happen if you got worse? He looked up, but she never asked about the person whose birthday opens that door. I said nothing. He nodded slowly, as though a long row of small things had finally lined up into a shape he could see clearly. I thought she was building a future with me, he said. A short, hollow laugh. She was calculating a position. I thought I was supporting her while she figured out her career. I was just making it easier for her to wait. His jaw tightened. The car, the expenses, the house, the renovation plans, the moving in, the key. He closed his eyes. It was all the same thing, wasn't it? I hated having to answer. Yes, I said. I believe it was. When he opened his eyes again, the man looking back at me was not the same one who had walked into this room. We returned to the apartment together. Caleb asked me to come, and I understood why. Not because he needed me to fight for him. Those days were over. But some conversations are too loaded to walk into alone, especially when the person waiting on the other side has spent 2 years learning which words make you hesitate. Serena was on the couch when we came in. She had changed clothes and her hair was neat. She was not a woman who had spent the last 2 hours falling apart. She stood when she saw us. Caleb, she said softly, can we talk privately? Caleb didn't move toward her. I've been looking at our account statements, he said. The softness left her face almost too quickly. He set a folder of printed pages on the coffee table. Since the wedding, I have covered rent, utilities, groceries, your car lease, your gym membership, the Costa Rica trip, the bedroom furniture, and the kitchen renovation you said you would repay once the freelance payments came in. Serena crossed her arms. Why are you doing this? Because I need to understand the truth while I'm still calm enough to listen to it. Silence. He looked down at the pages and then back at her. In 22 months of marriage, I have contributed over $18,000 to our shared expenses. Your total deposits to the joint account amount to $900. Once, last March, you told me it was from a consulting client. It was complicated, she said. I called the state business registry. Caleb said, there is no company registered under the name you gave me. I searched for the consulting firm you described. There is no registration. No public filings. No client trail. No evidence it exists. Serena's eyes sharpened. You investigated me. I believed you for 22 months. He said. I think that was long enough. For a few seconds, she said nothing. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen. Outside, a car passed. The apartment was so still that everything beyond it seemed to get louder. Then Serena exhaled and looked away. I thought you had more than you do, she said. The words dropped into the room like something breaking. She seemed to hear herself. But instead of pulling the words back, she lifted her chin slightly, as though she had decided that honesty was safer now than another performance. I thought the house would eventually be partly yours. She continued. I thought your father had accounts you would eventually control. I thought we were building towards something secure. We, Caleb repeated quietly. Yes. We? She said. Louder now. Don't act like finances don't matter in a marriage. Everyone thinks about security. Everyone wants a better life. Caleb looked at her for a long time. I thought we were planning our life together, he said. You were planning around my father's money. Her expression tightened. You make it sound ugly. It is ugly, Caleb said, because you didn't marry me and hope we would build something together. You married me and waited for a door to open. And when it didn't, you copied the key. She looked at the papers, then at me, then back at Caleb. And in the silence that followed, there was nothing left to defend. Caleb did not raise his voice. I think that was what finally reached her more than any argument could have. If he had shouted, she could have cried. If he had called her names, she could have pointed at his anger and made herself the one who had been wronged. But he stood there with his voice steady and his hands still, and looked at her the way a man looks at something he has finally decided to stop pretending is what it isn't. I want you to leave, he said. Serena started. You don't mean that. I do. This is your father's influence. You wouldn't be doing this on your own. I am doing this on my own, Caleb said. This is what I should have done the moment I realized I was the only one actually building this marriage. Her voice rose slightly. You can't throw me out. I live here. I'm your wife. I have legal rights. I know, Caleb said. That is why I am handling this properly. I'm contacting an attorney today. We will separate the joint account, document the shared expenses, and begin the divorce process. You can take your personal belongings. Half of the joint account is yours. Anything you can document that you paid for, we discuss through lawyers. Serena laughed once, brittle and cold. 2 years of marriage and you're treating me like a business transaction. Caleb looked at the account statements on the table. You did that first, he said quietly. She grabbed her phone, her keys, her purse. At the door, she paused and turned back. Waiting. Caleb said nothing. She left. The apartment felt hollow after that. But hollow in the way a room feels when something cluttered has finally been removed and the space it leaves behind is honest. Caleb stood still for a moment. Then he said, almost to himself, I loved who I thought she was. And that was where it ended. And where everything else began? The divorce took 4 months. The prenuptial agreement stood exactly as Elaine had said it would. Serena's attorney reviewed the documentation, measured the legal landscape, and advised her to accept what the law allowed, rather than pursue what Carol had already protected, long before Serena ever entered the picture. She did not leave gracefully. People like Serena rarely do. There was one final phone call. One last attempt to convince Caleb that his father had controlled him, poisoned his ability to love freely, kept him isolated from a real life. She spoke for several minutes, building her case against me with the kind of conviction that comes from having practiced it many times alone. Caleb listened until she finished. Then he thanked her for the years they had shared, wished her well, and said goodbye. He told me about it 3 weeks later over Sunday dinner at my kitchen table. He looked tired in the way people look after surviving something that required more of them than they expected. But he also looked steadier, more settled in himself, like a man who had been carrying someone else's version of his life for 2 years and had finally put it down. Halfway through dinner, he said, "There's someone I want you to meet someday." I looked up from my plate. "Her name is Ruth," he said. "She's a structural engineer. We met at a conference in Seattle. We've had 3 dinners." He smiled, slightly embarrassed. On the first one, when the check came, she took it before I could reach for my wallet. She said she had a personal rule about paying her own way until at least the 4th date. I laughed out loud for the first time in what felt like months. "Smart woman," I said. That's what I thought. I did not ask too many questions. I did not plan how I would evaluate her. I had learned something too. Sitting in that apartment listening to Caleb stand up for himself. Protection mattered. Yes. But protection without trust eventually becomes another kind of prison. My son deserved wisdom, not suspicion. After dinner, we sat on the back porch with coffee and a bottle of wine Carol had saved for something significant. I decided that waiting for the perfect occasion was no longer a plan I was willing to keep. It was a quiet evening, the kind that October sometimes gives you without warning. Caleb looked out at the yard and after a while said, "I've been thinking about doing something with the trust. Not taking from it, adding to it. A small scholarship, in Mom's name, for students who lost a parent to cancer." I set my coffee cup down. He continued, "She left me more than money. She left me a way to know what kind of man I'm supposed to be." I looked at him across the table, in the porch light, in the house his mother had loved, and I saw her as clearly as I had ever seen her. Not gone. Carried forward. Later that night, after Caleb drove home, I stood alone in the hallway. The house was quiet again, but it was a different quiet from the one I had lived with for 12 years. That old silence had been heavy with things unsaid, with warnings swallowed, with a room kept locked because the world outside it wasn't ready yet. This was something else. I stood outside the study door. The deadbolt was in place. The keypad waited. April 9th. 1961. For years, I had believed the lock was there to keep people out. Serena? Greed. Anyone who looked at love and saw a transaction. And maybe that had always been part of it. But standing there that night, I understood what else it had been doing all along. It had been keeping something safe until the right moment. Not just documents. Not just financial protections. Carol's voice. Her clarity. Her love with its bones still in it. She had known she would not be there to warn our son herself. So she wrote him a letter and sealed it in a room he could only reach when he was ready to go looking. When he had seen enough to know what he was looking for, I pressed my hand lightly against the wood. The house had survived Serena's patience and her planning. Caleb had survived the heartbreak of loving someone who was only ever loving an idea of him. And Carol's love had arrived exactly when our son needed it most. I turned off the hallway light and walked back to the kitchen. The door stayed locked. But the family was finally free. If this story reached something in you, I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Would you have confronted her earlier? Or would you have stayed quiet and let the truth find its own moment? And if you've ever watched someone finally understand the difference between the people who love them and the people who are simply waiting for an opening, tell me about it below. Those stories matter. Subscribe for more real-life stories about betrayal, survival, and the kind of quiet justice that takes years to arrive but never, somehow, fails to come.